Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a really interesting source in front of us today. It's an excerpt from a YouTube sermon by Pastor Joe Dong Han.
Hmm.
And the core idea we're diving into, it's all about radical transformation.
Yeah, the kind that seems, well, almost impossible, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you look at someone who just seems totally resistant to any kind of change.
Exactly. And the sermon apparently taps right into that feeling.
Yeah.
Despair maybe we sometimes feel over people or situations that just seem stuck, unsolvable.
Or even our own stuff, those habits we can't shake, that feeling of hitting a wall. The sermon acknowledges that right up front.
Right. And the main character for this deep dive, as presented in this source, is someone who was described as a sign of despair for the early church.
Yeah.
A name that apparently just struck fear into people. We're talking about Saul.
Saul, yes. And our mission here, based on this sermon excerpt, is really to explore how this seemingly impossible change occurred in his life.
And what insights, according to the source, that might offer you listening today.
Right. What can we take away from it?
So let's set the scene a bit. Who was this Saul, according to the sermon, right before everything changed? It draws on Acts chapter 9, verses 1 and 2.
And the description is pretty intense. It says Saul was still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord.
Still breathing threats. Wow.
Yeah, and the sermon really emphasizes that word still, pointing out that, even after things like Stephen's martyrdom, his persecution hadn't eased up at all. If anything, maybe it was intensifying.
So relentless. And breathing threats and murder. The source apparently interprets that quite literally, doesn't it?
It does. It talks about threats and murder felt in his very breath. Like it was just pouring out of him, this deep-seated anger, this desire to basically wipe out the church.
It wasn't just a passing feeling. It was core to him at that moment.
Exactly. And he wasn't just sitting around being angry. He was taking action. He goes to the high priest.
Right, to get official backing.
Precisely. To get letters for the synagogues in Damascus. And the source is clear, these were essentially arrest warrants. Ojina, as the sermon notes.
So official permission to hunt people down. He's escalating things.
Absolutely. And his objective was crystal clear, according to the source.
Which was?
Find followers of the way, that early name for Christians.
Men and women both.
Yes, importantly, men and women. Bind them, haul them back to Jerusalem, presumably for trial, imprisonment, worse.
The sermon apparently uses some really strong comparisons to get across the fear he generates.
Extremely strong. It compares the fear he inspired to Nazi Germany, or the commander of Unit 731 from the Japanese occupation era.
That's chilling. It really lands the point about how terrifying he must have seemed.
It does. The source uses these to stress that this wasn't just disapproval, this was dread. And the sermon's point is his zeal, his conviction. It seemed utterly unstoppable by any human means.
From the perspective of an early Christian, the idea of Saul changing, it would seem completely hopeless, impossible.
Totally impossible. Which, of course, sets the stage for what happens next.
The moment that defies all that, the encounter on the road to Damascus. The sermon walks through Acts 9, verses 3 and 9. So what happens?
Well, as he's getting close to the city, suddenly, out of nowhere, this light from heaven shines all around him.
Just bam! A sudden flash.
Yes, sudden, overwhelming. And his reaction is immediate. He falls straight to the ground, knocked off his feet, literally.
And then he hears something.
He hears a voice, very distinct, saying, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?
Why do you persecute me? That's incredibly direct. How does he respond?
Understandably, with confusion,
Yeah.
He asks, who are you, Lord?
And the answer?
The reply is stunning. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting.
Wow. The very person whose followers he was hunting. The source must highlight that connection.
Oh, absolutely. It's central, that direct confrontation. And then he's given an instruction right then and there.
What's he told to do?
Rise and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do. So a complete change of plan, an immediate redirection.
What about the other people with him? Did they experience this too?
It's interesting. The source says they heard the sound, the voice, but they didn't see anyone, and they were struck speechless.
So they knew something profound happened, but they didn't get the full picture like Saul did.
Exactly. It seems to have been primarily directed at Saul, though not entirely private.
And Saul himself, what's his physical state after this? After he gets up?
He gets up, his eyes are open, but he can't see a thing.
Blinded.
Completely blind. He has to be led by the hand into Damascus. Just imagine that. The fearsome Saul, suddenly helpless, being led like a child.
And the source mentions he stays like this for a while.
Yes, for 3 days. blind, and during that time, he doesn't eat or drink anything. A total sensory and physical shutdown almost.
Okay, so this massive, totally unexpected event happens to this person everyone thought was completely unchangeable. How does the sermon tie this back to its main theme of transformation?
Well, this encounter is presented as the prime example of what the sermon calls God's surprising intervention.
Allah. God's sovereign intervention, meaning.
Meaning, according to the source, this was an action initiated by God, completely outside of human expectation or effort. It wasn't about Saul deciding to reconsider things.
It happened to him.
Exactly. It went beyond human judgment, human possibility. The sermon emphasizes that this change, which looked impossible from down here, happened precisely because of this powerful sovereign act from above.
Okay, so the core insight the source is drawing out here is that this kind of radical, seemingly impossible transformation can happen through this kind of divine interruption.
That's the key takeaway. It wasn't earned. It wasn't gradual development based on Saul's efforts. It was an intervention.
And the sermon makes the point that this story, though ancient, isn't just history.
Right. It explicitly frames it as relevant for listeners today in, 2025 or whenever they're hearing it. That's crucial to the sermon's application.
So the central question the source seems to be wrestling with is, how did God reach this guy, this persecutor?
Yeah, how did God find him, and how was he so completely turned around through this meeting?
And the answer it provides.
The source sums it up powerfully. It says the encounter reveals God's powerful ability, and the excerpt, his calling that completely changes a person's life.
That idea of a life being completely overturned, reoriented by God's power and call.
That's the heart of the message drawn from this specific event in the source.
Okay, so let's just recap this deep dive based on the sermon excerpt. We've looked at Saul,
Ear's persecutor, breathing threats,
undergoing this incredibly dramatic transformation on the road to Damascus.
initiated by that blinding light, that voice, a divine encounter.
And the sermon's main point, drawn from this source, is that this serves as a powerful example of change.
Right, change that seemed impossible from a human standpoint, but happened through what the sermon calls God's sovereign intervention.
And critically, the source presents this not just as an old story, but as something holding relevance for you today.
Which kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on, building directly on that source material.
Go on.
Well, if a figure like Saul, so seemingly set, so intensely opposed, so apparently unchangeable, could experience such a radical life-altering transformation through this kind of unexpected, powerful encounter.
Yeah.
What might that source's idea of God's powerful, life-changing ability mean when you look at the situations or the people or even the patterns in your own life today that feel, well, impossible?